The first thing I saw when I came home after 14 years was the old sycamore tree, split by lightning but still standing. The second thing I saw was Maheen Pharaoh, wearing a pale yellow dress in the daylight, holding a small wooden box against her chest like it contained either a memory or a weapon. And the first thing she said to me was not welcome home, not you've changed, not I missed you. She looked straight into my eyes and said, "You promised you would marry me, Arvin. Now prove you meant it." Before we go deeper into this story, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Ancient Truth if you believe in kindness, second chances, and promises that somehow survive even when people don't know how to keep them. I was 8 years old when I made that promise, barefoot in the summer grass, with mud on my knees and a red string tied around my finger. Maheen was 7, all fierce eyes and tangled hair, the kind of child who could cry over a wounded sparrow and then fight 3 boys twice her size for laughing at it. We lived in Alder Creek, a town so small that everyone knew when your mother baked bread, when your father lost work, and when your heart broke even before you said it out loud. Maheen lived next door with her grandmother, Mrs. Sable, in a blue house with white shutters and wind chimes that sounded like tiny bells whenever the afternoon breeze came down from the hills. That summer, Maheen's grandmother got sick. I didn't understand how sickness could make grown-ups whisper. I only knew Maheen stopped climbing trees, stopped racing me to the creek, and started sitting on the porch steps with her hands folded too tightly. One day she told me she was afraid everyone she loved would leave. I didn't know what to do with fear that big, so I did what children do. I made a promise bigger than myself. I took her hand under the sycamore tree and told her, when we grew up, would marry her, and she would never be alone again. She made me spit into my palm and shake on it. Then she placed the red string around my finger and said promises were only real if they had something tied to them. For years, that promise became our secret shelter. When her grandmother died, she came to my window at dawn, silent and shaking, and I let her sit beside me on the floor while the whole town slept. When my father lost his job and started drinking silence into our home, Maheen left sandwiches in our mailbox. When kids mocked her patched clothes, I walked beside her like I was stronger than I was. When my mother died the winter I turned 13, Maheen was the only person who did not tell me to be brave. She sat in the church pew beside me, pressed her shoulder against mine, and cried hard enough for both of us. But life has a cruel way of testing childhood vows with adult pain. My father sold our house when I was 15 and moved us across the country to live with his brother. I begged to stay. I wrote Maheen letters for the first year, then the second, then less often when work, school, grief, and distance began turning memory into something painful to touch. Her replies came folded neatly, smelling faintly of lavender soap. She told me about the town, the rain, the sycamore, her dreams of opening a bakery, and how she still believed some promises were not childish just because they were made by children. Then my letters stopped. Not because I forgot her, though that is what I let everyone believe. They stopped because my father got sick, debt swallowed us, and I became a man too early. I worked construction by day and delivered groceries by night. I learned to measure life in rent payments, hospital bills, and the sound of my father coughing through walls. I kept Maheen's letters in a shoebox under my bed, but I never answered them. Shame is a quiet thief. It steals your voice first, then your courage, then the people who were waiting for you to speak. 14 years passed. My father died on a Thursday morning in a white hospital room while sunlight moved across the floor like it was searching for someone to forgive. After the funeral, I found the shoebox again. Inside were Maheen's letters, a faded photo of us by the creek, and the red string, dry and fragile, still knotted in a loop. At the bottom was one letter I had never opened. It was dated 8 years earlier. My hands trembled when I read it. She had written that her bakery had failed before it even opened, that her grandmother's house needed repairs she couldn't afford, and that people in town still asked if I would ever return. At the end she wrote, "I don't need you to keep a child's promise. I only need to know I didn't imagine the boy who made it." I drove back to Alder Creek the next morning. The town looked smaller than memory but sharper too, as if every road had been waiting to accuse me. The church bell still leaned to one side. The creek still flashed silver between the trees. Mrs. Sable's blue house was still there, though the paint had peeled, the porch sagged, and the wind chimes were gone. And Maheen stood under the sycamore tree, not as the little girl I had left behind, but as a woman who had survived being disappointed and had learned to stand without asking anyone to hold her up. She opened the wooden box. Inside were every letter I had ever sent her, tied with the same red string. She told me she wasn't asking me to marry her because of a childhood game. She was asking me to prove whether I had become the kind of man who ran from promises or returned to repair what he broke. Her bakery dream was dying again. A developer wanted to buy her grandmother's house, tear it down, and build rental cabins near the creek. She had 30 days to settle old taxes and repairs, or the house would be gone. She said if I meant even half of what I once promised, I would help her save the only home that had ever loved her back. I wanted to say yes immediately, but yes was too small for what I owed. So I stayed. I rented a room above the town pharmacy and began working on the house at sunrise. The roof leaked in 3 places. The porch boards were soft with rot. The kitchen, the heart of Maheen's bakery dream, needed wiring, paint, shelves, and an oven that didn't cough smoke. At first, she treated me like a hired hand, not a returned friend. She gave instructions, thanked me politely, and kept a wall between us built from every unanswered letter. The days were bright and hot, full of hammer strikes, sawdust, and the smell of bread dough rising in bowls by the window. Maheen baked test loaves each morning, selling them from a folding table in the yard. People came for cinnamon rolls, honey biscuits, and gossip. They looked at me with the careful curiosity reserved for men who come back after leaving damage behind. Some were kind. Some were not. Old Mr. Venn told me people don't get applause for returning to fires they helped start. He was right. One afternoon, while fixing the back steps, I found a carving beneath the old paint. 2 crooked initials, A and M, inside a lopsided heart. I remembered carving it with a pocketknife, convinced our names would last forever. Maheen saw it too. For one breath, the wall in her face cracked. Then she turned away and said would remembered more faithfully than people. That night, I wrote her a letter by hand. I did not defend myself. I told her about my father, the bills, the hospital rooms, and the shame that had made me silent. I told her silence was still a choice, and I had chosen wrong. I slipped the letter under her door and expected nothing. The next morning, she left coffee for me on the porch. It was not forgiveness, but it was warmer than yesterday. The change came slowly, like dawn deciding whether to enter a room. Maheen began working beside me instead of around me. We painted the shutters blue again. We sanded tables for the bakery. We argued over where the counter should go and laughed when a bag of flour burst over both of us, leaving us white-haired and breathless in the sunlight. One evening, during a storm, the power failed, and we sat on the kitchen floor with candles between us while rain battered the roof I had not yet finished. She told me she had once hated me so much she prayed to forget my face, then cried because she couldn't. I told her I had missed her in ways I had no right to name. But saving the house was harder than repairing it. The developer, Calder Rusk, arrived in a black truck with clean boots and a smile that never reached his eyes. He reminded Maheen that sentiment did not pay taxes. He offered her more money than the house was worth and told her she could start over somewhere easier. I watched her grip the edge of the porch railing until her knuckles went pale. For a moment, I feared she would say yes, not because she wanted to, but because exhaustion can sound like wisdom when you have been fighting alone too long. Instead, she looked at the house, the tree, the flour on her apron, and the people gathered at the yard table buying bread they didn't need just to help her last another day. She told Calder the house was not for sale. He laughed softly and said the county auction would decide that. That was when Alder Creek began to remember what community meant. Mr. Venn brought lumber from his barn. The schoolteacher organized a bake sale. Teenagers painted signs. The church opened its hall for a Saturday market. People who had once watched Maheen struggle from their windows now stood beside her in the daylight. I worked until my hands blistered and split. Maheen baked until midnight, her hair pinned messily, her cheeks dusted with flour, her eyes alive with a hope she was afraid to trust. On the morning of the county deadline, we still fell short by $3,000. Maheen sat under the sycamore tree with the wooden box in her lap and tried not to cry. I had nothing left to sell except my truck, the one thing that could take me away again. Maybe that was why selling it felt like the only honest choice. I signed the papers at noon and handed her the money without a speech. She stared at the envelope, then at me, and whispered that I would be stuck here. I told her maybe being stuck was just another word for finally staying. The bakery opened 2 weeks later on the brightest morning I can remember. Sunlight poured over the blue shutters. The wind chimes had been replaced. The sign above the porch read Sable and Son Bakery, painted in Maheen's careful hand. People lined up down the path, laughing, hugging, carrying flowers, pretending not to wipe their eyes. Maheen stood behind the counter, trembling, and when she looked at me across the room, I saw the little girl under the sycamore and the woman who had built herself from broken things. Near sunset, after the last customer left and the shelves were nearly empty, she took me outside. The sycamore cast long shadows across the grass. She opened the wooden box once more and took out the red string. It looked too fragile to survive another knot, but she wrapped it gently around my finger anyway. She said proving a promise did not mean being perfect. It meant coming back, telling the truth, doing the work, and staying when staying was hard. Then she asked me, not as a child clinging to fear, but as a woman choosing with her whole heart, whether I still wanted to marry her someday. My answer came with tears I did not try to hide. I told her I had wanted many things in my life, but none as much as the chance to love her correctly. Months later, we married in the bakery yard beneath the sycamore tree. There were no grand chandeliers, no expensive flowers, no polished ballroom floor. There was only sunlight, fresh bread, wind chimes, neighbors, and Maheen walking toward me in a simple dress the color of morning. When she reached me, she slipped the old red string into my palm. It had done its work, she said. We did not need it to hold us together anymore. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, leave a comment, share it with someone who still believes love can heal old wounds, and subscribe to Ancient Truth for more emotional stories about kindness, forgiveness, and second chances. And special request, comment I believe in second chances if you have ever hoped that someone would come back, not with excuses, but with love and action. Years later, people still came to Sable and Son Bakery for Maheen's honey biscuits, but many stayed for the story of the promise tree. Children would run around it in the daytime, tying ribbons to low branches and making brave little vows they barely understood. Sometimes Maheen and I would sit on the porch after the morning rush, our hands folded together, watching the light move across the yard. We knew promises were not magic. They did not stop grief, distance, fear, or failure. But a promise, when carried by courage, could become a bridge back to the person you were meant to be. And every time the wind chimes rang in the warm daylight, I remembered the girl who asked me to prove I meant it, and I thanked God she had.